Good morning, everybody. My name is Jessi LaMain, and I am grateful to be serving as your worship associate today. And I just want to say it's such a different experience having the congregation sing at you. That was so pretty. I will tell you, my first car was a legendarily boring rusty bronze 1989 Toyota Cressida. In all her glory, she had precisely 240,006 miles, balding tires, and a stubborn can-do attitude. The interior was a careful gradient of brown and darker brown, exactly matching the outside, and just as faded as you can imagine. The seats already held somebody else's shape, their memories, and their stains in the fabric too. So, as you can tell, and of course, I named her the poop car. Because obviously she had all the shades of brown imaginable, and I have to tell you that my dad hated that name, which naturally, as a 16-year-old of any age, that made it even funnier to me, really. But also to 16-year-old me, it was a term of affection. I loved that car. My dad found the poop car parked just around the corner from our house for sale for a whopping $650, but it might as well have been a Rolls Royce. I cherished that car like it was priceless. Before the poop car, my world was small and carefully measured. I walked or biked to school, relied on rides from parents or friends, took the bus, memorized the Max lines, way back when it was just the blue line and the red line. I did neighborhood chores like mowing lawns, but a real job felt out of reach without what most job applications called reliable transportation. Even my friendships were shaped by my space, who I could reach on foot or who had room for me in their car. And then came the keys. With them, I did learn the rituals of responsibility, like how to pump gas, where to keep the registration papers, what tools lived in the trunk, just in case. And if you're a car person and you heard the mileage, you already know I learned how to constantly top off the oil and the coolant because everything leaked. Becoming a driver, it did expand my world almost overnight. I could carry myself and all of my instruments, could go to and from school and other situations on my own time. Jobs were no longer dependent on somebody else's schedule, and friendships extended beyond the school day. I felt briefly and powerfully like a bigger part of our world. Looking back, getting a driver's license and a starter car seemed to be my dad's way of ritualistically welcoming his kids into adulthood. He found a particular joy in it. It was also a clear example of how we inherit these traditions and systems simply because that's how it's done. And that's how the people before us did it. Now, a few decades and many, many cars later, I find it interesting and honestly maybe a little unsettling how deeply we've tied access, freedom, and belonging to a machine. That a car can symbolize independence, opportunity, and even worth says as much about our culture as it did about my teenage sense of possibility. It does make me stop and ask the question, why was this the thing that unlocked my freedom? Why this type of movement in life required ownership? Why my participation in this wider world depended so heavily on a rather expensive and fragile object? I also wonder what other forms that particular freedom could have taken. And honestly, I still could. What would it look like if more of our neighborhoods were designed for walking and motorless transportation like bikes? And if transit systems felt reliable and dignified? That would mean our connection didn't depend so much on distance, and worth wouldn't be so easily measured by how far or fast you could go. So the poop car was never just transportation. It was a threshold, a human-made, systematically designed, somewhat rigged threshold nonetheless. And for me, looking back at this experience, it's a reminder of how independence often arrives imperfectly, leaking everything, carrying someone else's stains, but still manages to change everything.
Before I start today, I want to acknowledge two things. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this topic, while really crucially important, is going to feel like this really big juxtaposition. And I understand that. I will get back to what we were just talking about, I promise. Know that I will get back there. The second thing is that unless I chicken out, I am going to say a word that I've never said from a pulpit before. I think you'll understand why. It's not something I do regularly. Our reading today is from Life After Cars by Sarah Goodyear, Doug Gordon, and Aaron Naparstek. Marshall McLuhan wrote in 1968, one thing which fish know exactly nothing about is water, since they have no anti-environment which would enable them to perceive the element they live in. Just as water is invisible to the fish, hardly any of us can perceive the swirling sea of cars and car-centric infrastructure around us. It's just the world in which we're swimming or driving. The trick then is to make the water visible to the fish. That's what 3 men attempted to do in San Francisco back in 2005. They stopped their pickup truck, they fed the meter a fistful of quarters, and they unloaded a black tarp, a row of sod, a 15-foot potted tree for shade, and a bench. They made a park in a parking space. They fenced their tiny park on 3 sides with a fence made of plastic bollards connected by rope, leaving it open on the side, facing the sidewalk. In about 15 minutes, and with less than $500 worth of materials, the trio had transformed an on-street parking spot into a small public park. They watched from a ways away, curious to see what would happen, and were thrilled when folks used the park, talked about the park, and laughed with one another. We created a social space. We created an invitation for public life, for socializing in a place that was previously just used for storing cars, for storing metal boxes. Afraid of backlash or even violence, the two decided to create a once-a-year parking day, a day when people in cities around the world would take over metered on-street parking spaces and creatively transform them into public space. You're part of a movement to reclaim streets. It is demonstrating an alternative to automobile dominance. Whatever it happens, Parking Day is wildly creative, elaborate, and joyous. It demonstrates that, if given the opportunity to cut through or circumvent the typical bureaucracy, it is quite easy to create space for people, not cars. In 1993, I loaded up my Mazda B2000 pickup truck with the Thelma and Louise Live bumper sticker on the back and drove across the country to move to Brooklyn, New York to live with my girlfriend, Evie. Every Tuesday and Wednesday, I had to go move my car because of opposite sides of the street parking regulations. I credit that action for my above-average parallel parking skills today. But aside from changing where I parked each week and occasional drives to upstate New York or to Arlington, Virginia, where Evie's parents lived, I did not really drive my car at all. I rode the subway into work in Manhattan, and I walked up and down 7th Avenue in Park Slope where everything we needed was. A little pet store to buy cat food, a laundromat, D'Agostino's grocery store, And probably most important, because the roaches had taken over our kitchen, 20 varieties of ethnic restaurants, not 20 restaurants, 20 different types of ethnic food were available within walking distance of my house. We lived in a place designed for people without cars, and it worked amazingly well. In fact, one day I was invited to a wedding shower for a coworker who lived in Queens. It was a long trip by, I think, 2 different subway lines and a bus, and it took about an hour and a half each way. It wasn't until I got home that it occurred to me that I could have driven the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway in about 20 minutes. But it never occurred to me because that's not how I lived. And I am really sorry to say that that has never been my reality since. This sermon was purchased at the auction last year, requested by Aaron Wolf. As you heard during the Time for All Ages, the Wolf family rides their bikes most places. And Aaron requested that I preach a sermon about the benefits of creating infrastructure that isn't centered on cars. Oregon City is not like New York City at all. It is much harder to get around without a car. Though we do have a decent bus system, and as you heard, there are a lot of benefits to riding bikes as a primary form of commuting. I live in the Montevilla neighborhood in Portland, and one of the things that I love about my neighborhood is that it's very walkable. Folks are always out walking dogs or just walking themselves. I know many of my neighbors. There isn't much traffic on my street, and there are good sidewalks. And a little under a mile away is a great neighborhood with restaurants and bakeries and a movie theater and little shops. I love walking to Montevilla and poking around. I also love that my neighborhood has really good public transit. My 27-year-old daughter, Mika, doesn't drive and mostly uses the 3 different bus lines within 5 blocks of our house, and the max that's about a mile away. And she really enjoys walking. And it's true that we're just 5 blocks off of 82nd Avenue. We're about the same distance from the 205 freeway. And as I typed this with cats sitting on me, if I listen closely, I can hear the freeway noise. Though it's not loud, and it kind of sounds like the ocean, to be honest. Perhaps the reason I like my neighborhood so much is that much of it was built before cars. Gleason Street, just 2 blocks away, was originally built partially as a transitway. In the early 20th century, streetcars moved people from farmlands into town along that street. And in 1911, when my house was built, cars were very rare. Clearly, this isn't the case anymore. And while I believe that there is definitely a benefit to having some cars, let's face it, not everyone can bike or even walk to a bus stop easily. Doing the research for this sermon has taught me so much about what the world could look like if it wasn't so car-centric. First thing is that cars kill people. Motor vehicle accidents kill about 40,000 people in the United States every year. About 2% of those are cyclists. About 17% are pedestrians. Car crashes are the most common accidental cause of death for young people ages 5 through 22. They're the second most common cause of accidental death by folks 23 to 67. In any group of 100,000 people, about 12 or 13 are killed by car accidents in a single year. These numbers have gone down as cars have gotten safer, with airbags and seatbelt use has become commonplace. Fewer kids are killed in cars because of good car seat usage. Interestingly, cars as a percentage of, children as a percentage of pedestrians killed in car accidents has gone way down. In the late 1970s, children under 15 were 18% of pedestrian victims of car accidents. In 2021, that number's gone down to 2.4%, according to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. But that's not actually great news, because it's not because of seatbelts or car seats or better safety regulations. It's because people don't let their kids walk so much. In the 1970s, kids walked everywhere. In the popular set of books about age-related milestones by Louise Bates Ames, your 4-year-old, your 6-year-old, those, anybody heard of them? Yeah, okay. Your 6-year-old, loving and defiant. One of the milestones they listed for kids entering first grade was, can they travel alone in the neighborhood 4 to 8 blocks to the school, store, playground, or friend's home? Very few of our 6-year-olds walk freely in their neighborhoods anymore. We may tell ourselves it's stranger danger, and certainly that's what the nosy neighbors who report children alone in the local park will point to as the issue. But the reality is, fewer than 350 kids under 21 are kidnapped by strangers each year, and it may be closer to 100. The bigger danger is cars. Crossing busy streets. Cars that don't see bike lanes. Going too fast in school zones. This is the danger, the actual danger and the perceptual danger. Because kids and parents don't feel safe sending kids alone into a world designed for people who are hurtling through our streets in metal boxes. They feel safer strapping their kids into their own metal boxes. And they aren't wrong. But there are other ways to do this. In the book Life After Cars, the authors talk about cities, primarily in Europe and Asia, where people changed cities to be more friendly to pedestrians and bicyclists than cars. In Tokyo, it's considered crucially important for children to walk to school. And so in the central city and in spaces around schools, cars aren't allowed during the time that kids go and come home from school. Mamasharis, or mom chariots, bicycles with space for 2 or 3 small children and grocery bags, are common. Elderly folks walk more safely or ride tricycles. A world that is safer for kids is safer for older people. A similar thing happened in Ghent, a city in Belgium. They got laws changed. They wanted to make their central city safer for bicyclists. They thought about it for a long time. The guy got a lot of negative feedback, but they did it overnight. They planned really carefully, and they did things in ways that made them easy to go back or adjust if things needed to be adjusted. They did paint. They did like cone kinds of things. They did signage. So it was stuff that, if like, okay, we really, actually the ambulance needs to get down the street, they could move it. And when it happened, it was this huge overnight success. People loved it. People felt safer walking. People felt safer taking their bikes. And the cars that needed to get in got in more quickly because traffic was so reduced. It was great. There are other reasons that it's important for kids to have safer streets. Studies show that kids who bike or walk have far better cognitive maps, something that Rowan told us about. I know my kids don't always know where something was when they were riding in a car. They had a much better sense of location when we were walking. Mental health struggles among children and teens have risen exponentially, and there are a lot of reasons for this. Phones are almost certainly one of the reasons. But if you ask teens what would get them off their phones, it's spaces where teens can gather independently. They want to hang out at a park with their friends. They want to walk to the store and get a snack. They want the independence that Gen X took for granted, and admittedly that some of our parents took too far. My kids told me that one of the things they liked best about my parenting was that I let them walk to the park on their own. I don't necessarily remember that. But I also know that we lived 3 blocks down a not busy street with sidewalks from a playground. And even if I went with them, because they were walking there, they felt like they were going on their own. That's empowering and important. one of the things that will help our kids' mental health is empowering them to take some risks and realize that they can do things. It's really important. Aaron Wolf, in our conversation about this topic, said we'd have a much better world if it was designed with 8-year-olds in mind. And he's right. A place where walking is safe, where parks and corner stores are frequent and accessible, that's a neighborhood I'd like to live in. Good things about fewer cars. Bad things about more cars. Autos that burn fossil fuels account for a giant part of climate change. Road runoff from tires poisons our water. Emissions cause asthma and breathing problems, especially in lower income neighborhoods. The freedom of the road that car companies have been selling us for decades is really killing us. And the freeways that made that freedom of the road, they cut through communities, they cut through neighborhoods. And often, like in Portland, the neighborhoods they cut through are the ones that poorer people or people of color lived in. I want to talk for a few moments about some of the horrific news that we've seen lately. I'm going to talk about it at the moment through the lens of motor vehicles, but that's only one aspect of it. First, Venezuela. Sure, Maduro wasn't elected democratically, but if we went in and took away every non-democratically elected leader, it's not why we removed him. It also really doesn't have anything to do with drugs, at least not the drugs that are killing people in the United States now. Venezuela pretty much ships cocaine to Asia. It's not a great thing, but it's not an our country problem. It's oil. And the president says that they stole our oil. How they managed to be our oil when it's under their ground is, a little confusing, but and that our oil companies are going to go in there and rebuild the infrastructure and pump the oil and share the proceeds with Venezuela. But United States companies don't really want to do that because that oil is really heavy and messy and icky and hard to pump. And no one knows who's going to control Venezuela in the years ahead, and so the oil companies don't want to go and invest in incredibly expensive machinery to pump oil when they don't know what's going to happen next year or the year after or the year after. And most Americans don't want it to be the United States that's controlling Venezuela. The second is the ICE killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis and the shooting by Border Patrol in Portland. The president and Kristi Noem say that Good was a domestic terrorist weaponizing her car against an ICE officer. How many of you have seen the video? Yeah. Now, well, I do believe that it is possible to use one's car as a weapon, say the person who drove their car at 40 miles an hour into a group of protesters in North Carolina. You can't tell me that driving away from someone at 5 miles an hour is weaponizing their car. You can't tell me that the mother of a 6-year-old who showed up with her car that day to protect kids at an elementary school when ICE was taking their parents, dropping their kids off at school, is a domestic terrorist. And even the video from the ICE agent doesn't show her assaulting him. It shows her saying, "I'm not mad at you," and then slowly turning away to get out of there and being shot in the face at point blank range. And as her car, careens slowly down the street and crashes into a parked car, the officer or another officer says, "Fucking bitch. I know whose side I'm on. I know whose side I'm on." We don't know enough about the situation in Portland. There isn't video out yet. But this is a case where the constant lies of this administration make me unlikely to believe them. I don't like that. I want to be able to trust the person who is the president of the United States. But this administration seems to believe that everyone of Venezuelan descent who has a tattoo is a member of Tren del Agua. We know this because we sent 150 of them to be tortured in an El Salvadorian prison. The vast majority of them were not gang members. And so when Border Patrol says that the Venezuelans shot in Portland were member of this gang who were trying to run over the agent with their car, I don't believe it. If it's true, I'm sorry, but it's a case of crying wolf too often, and coming the day after Renee Good is trying to run over an ICE agent, I don't believe it. Portland's police chief, in a measured and thoughtful and emotional statement, acknowledged that the two did perhaps have some connection to the gang, but that aside from prostitution, they hadn't been accused of any gang activity or violence. And again, neither prostitution nor gang association are death penalty offenses, and so shooting people in a crowded parking lot seems a great overreach to me. And we're going to pull this back to cars for a moment, because a question that the book asks, and something to think about, is how much of the fact that we now live in a world where we are so isolated from one another for a variety of reasons, but one of those reasons is that we move everywhere in tiny metal boxes by ourselves or with our family or our friends. We don't all get on the bus together. We don't interact with all of our neighbors because we're all walking to the grocery store. We order food online. We have somebody get in a tiny metal box and bring it to our house. We go sit in a parking lot and somebody brings us our groceries. We are creating a world where we are not interacting with our neighbors, and it is killing us on so many levels, and sometimes quite literally. How can we make a better world? I'm going to give you one fact to think about. If you take away anything from this, let it be this. If you are driving and you hit somebody going 20 miles an hour, there's an 18% chance of serious injury, but only a 1% chance of death. If you hit somebody going 35 miles an hour, that risk goes up to a 67% chance of serious injury and a 19% chance of death. If you are around people, if you are driving in neighborhoods or school zones where there are pedestrians, where there are bicyclists, slow down. In an ideal world, we would shift our neighborhoods and they would be more friendly to pedestrians and bicyclists. But that's a step that other people are going to have to fight for as well. What you can do right now is slow down. Let's figure out how to make our streets and neighborhoods safer. Let's figure out how to give our kids more freedom and responsibility. Let's drive like we care about bicyclists and pedestrians. It is one way to advocate for a better world, and there are so many ways we need a better world right now, friends. At the vigil I went to last night in downtown Portland for people harmed by ICE, we focused on being peaceful and not letting anyone drag us into arguing or fighting. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. That is what we chanted. Who keeps us safe? Who keeps us safe? Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Fighting for safer neighborhoods, whether it's through fewer cars or fewer ICE agents. Who keeps us safe?
Keep us safe.
Let's go out and keep everybody safe. Blessed be it. Amen.